So this is the adorable pillowcase that we're going to make. Standard size. Sorry if you don't like Peppa Pig. This is what I had to use. And my little girl will get this when we're finished with it. It fits really well. It's not too big and sloppy. Good length on it. And so this is what we're going to make in the next few minutes. So grab all your materials, your notions, and let's get started. Hello, this is Susan Mitchell from S.A. Mitchell Creations, and today I'm going to show you how to sew a pillowcase. The pillowcase will have hidden seams, French seams on the side, and because it has a French seam, it'll be finished and you don't need to zigzag or have a serger to do it. And when you wash it, it will not fall apart. So you're going to need your fabric for the body, the trim, and the cuff, and we'll go over the sizes later. For notions, you're going to need a cutting ruler, mat, and rotary cutter. If you don't have these, it's not a big deal. You can always use scissors and a pen, marking pen for fabric. Either way, it's an easy project. You don't need to be all high-tech with this, although this is what I'm going to use for accuracy. It does create a better product. You need thread. You're not going to see the thread, so it's not imperative that it matches the background. I'm going to use it to top stitch, so I actually want to contrast. I don't want it to match the exact color. Another thing you're going to need are pins or clips. I like clips. They don't hurt me and I don't step on them. And last, depending how good you are today, a seam ripper. And I'm hoping not to use this. Okay, so our finished pillowcase will be roughly 32 inches long by 20 inches wide. Now that can change depending on how you cut your fabric. This is a great project where you can change up the sizes depending on the size of pillowcase you want. This is for a standard pillow. I'm going to cut the body at 26 inches by the width of the fabric, which is 45. The trim I'm going to cut at 2 inches wide, and that's by the width of the fabric of 45 inches. And the cuff I'm going to cut at 12 inches by the 45 inches. Now, standard cotton generally comes in 45-inch wide, which is 115 centimeters. Now, that's what they label it as, but when you get it, it's actually about 42 to 45 inches. It varies. Some people pre-wash their fabric, some do not. Depending on the quality of the fabric, the weave, if it's a looser weave, it will shrink more. Depending on who you're making it for, how perfect do you want it to look? This is an example of a lower quality fabric. Just going to zoom in. It pulled after I made it and then I washed it. It shrunk a bit because it was a looser weave. And I wasn't concerned. It wasn't a gift. It was just a quick sew. So if it's a gift or you put it on display, take the extra time and wash it first, iron it well. A great project, you're always using your iron, taking your time, and perfecting that stitch. It makes a big difference, even just your stitch length, on making something look of good quality or just a quick, fast run through. So what I'm going to do is pause your video and wash and iron your fabric if that's what you choose to do, or if you're just going to go ahead and cut and sew, iron up what you do have so that it's all ready to go, and then come back and press play and I'll go over cutting and sizes once again. Let's line up the selvage with your ruler, making sure that it's lined up here. Sometimes they're really off, so you'll have to line them up. And then You notice how this isn't straight. So we're going to straighten that up before we even start. You don't have to do this fast. I've seen too many people cut themselves and it slips. Don't do that. It's very painful. So now with this straight, we are going to measure out 26 inches. It's all level here. 10, 25. This is what's nice about the cutting table, is the rulers are right on the table. But if you didn't have one, just use your measuring tape and measure the length. Line it up. And cut. So this is the main body. I'll just fold that up, put it to the side. This is going to be my trim. And again, I have to straighten the edge before I actually cut it. This one might be pretty even already. As you can see, it's straight on the selvage here, and it's also beautifully on the fold there. So it's squaring up nice once I cut the edge. And I only want 2 inches. So I usually cut it and then I flip it because for me it's easier to cut like this. Lining up the edges. And going slow. Now what some people do for their rulers, they actually buy the grab bars that go in bathrooms. I just haven't gotten around to buy one, and suction cups on, and then your fingers are away from where the blades are. They come in handy. And then this is my cuff. I'm going to cut this at 12 inches. First I'm going to straighten it out. And then myself, I like to cut it this way. So it makes it easier and quicker if you have the tools, but not impossible if you don't. So again, I was just going to show the comparison. My length is going to be the same as on this Pillowcase 26. Now, I cut my trim at 2 inches. This was cut at 3.5. So it is going to be a smaller trim. And the cuff here was cut at 13 inches. And this time I cut it at 12. So it's going to be a little bit different, but not much. Now, a lot of people don't top stitch their trim. I'm going to top stitch for this reason. What I found after I washed my pillowcases, I had made a whole bunch of really nice pillowcases. This little piece here, it curled up so tight it looked gross. And I was not going to be ironing pillowcases. I don't do that. I'm not going to do that. So all I did was ironed it out well, stitched it down, and I've had no problem since. It just keeps its shape really nice. So now what we're going to do is, again, just pause your video, iron everything. Ironing makes it look more professional. Get rid of these center creases on everything. And then come back. Okay, so I'm back from ironing these pieces, and I forgot to mention that the trim piece you will want to fold in half and put a nice crease in with your iron as well. It will just help keep in place while we pin all the pieces together. Now what we're going to do is lay out the cuff piece right side up so that you see the good side of the fabric. take your body piece, it's the large piece, and we're going to line up, starting at the one corner by the selvage. That's the finished side. And just line it up so that it's perfectly in line. And notice that I have a pattern that is a particular direction. So I want it facing the way I want to see my pillow. Next will be your trim. Again, line up the corners. Make it all line up nice. And then pin or clip your way around. I actually find they slide out nicer when they're upside down. So you're going to do this for the whole 45 width of the fabric here. When you're done that, take your body, the large piece, and roll it up. Don't come up past the trim, but just roll it up nice and snug. Then take your piece, fold it up so it aligns with the top, and then you're going to include that in your pins or clips. We're going to sew all of this together. This is what's going to allow us to have a hidden seam along the top. So once all those layers are together, make sure you're not going to sew into that larger piece that's rolled. Just kind of move it back. Do that all the way across. And then I'll meet you at the sewing machine and we're going to sew down that side. Okay, we're back. What I'm using is a number 11 needle in my machine. The thread is just a standard cotton. You can use an all-purpose, sometimes they're polyester for this particular situation. And so what we're going to do is making 1/4 inch seams. I'm going to just put my presser foot down and my needle. And then I'm going to just set my stitch. I usually sew at a 3 and just take a couple stitches. And then I back up. And then you're ready to go. Just make a straight line. As you can see, mine got caught up on the end there. Just lift it and move it just ever so slightly. If you ever stop, put your needle down, and this will ensure that your fabrics don't move around. Everything should be lying flat. I just kind of keep one hand at the back when I'm doing long strips, usually like straps where there's a lot of top stitching, because you want a nice even stitch. This one's not being seen, but if it's being seen, just sometimes they can do funny things and you can have lots of little short ones. So I just kind of, I don't pull on it, but I just hold on to it so it flows through at an even rate. I do have a walking foot on, so it moves pretty nice, but okay, so when we get to the end, we're gonna do the same as the beginning, where you're gonna sew to the end, back stitch a couple, and then go forward. Now we are gonna end up cutting some of this off, so it doesn't really matter how accurate that is, but then I have an automatic cutter. In this case, you would lift your foot, make sure your needle's up, and then you can pull it out and snip. Okay, so here we are. We have sewn our seam all the way down, and what we want to do now is turn it inside out. When you're making purses and bags, they call this birthing when you turn it inside out. right side out. Just take your time if it's a little tight. Should maneuver pretty good. Okay, so this is what we have. We're going to go to the ironing board and iron this. We're going to straighten that all out. Iron that down. Your seam is hidden inside. It makes beautiful finish. So just make sure this is all pulled up nice here. Iron it and do that for the full length. Press this again so it's nice. I'm going to top stitch mine. I'll decide in a minute if I'm going to do the top as well. It just holds it down nice. And we'll just move to the ironing board. Okay, so I'm at the ironing board now. And what I'm going to do is, this is upside down. This is the wrong side of the fabric. And I'm just kind of finger pressing and pushing the back seam so it lays nice. And I'm not going to put a lot of pressure or time. I just want to make sure that edge pushes up nice. So when I do the other side, I'm not getting sort of having it bubble over without realizing. I'm just kind of pushing it up. Not taking too much time doing that. And turn it over. This is where I'm going to spend more time. So I already know the back is nice and straight. So I'm going to do the same for this cuff. Just pushing it up. See how it wants to sometimes go down like this? I haven't done the top yet. I want to make sure that this is all lined up nice. I just have my iron set on cotton. I do have my steam on. Just helps with the pressing and the wrinkles. Now that this is done and really nice, I'm just gonna push up and establish that nice crease. Okay. After I iron this nice and flat, what I've done is I've trimmed it, but I also want to do my top stitching before we do any other seams. I'm going to up my stitch length. In this case, I'm going to try a 4. Sometimes it depends on how easily it moves under the foot. I have to change the numbers. So again, foot down, I have the same thread that I'm using to contrast. Needle down, and I'm just doing like an 1/8 inch seam. Okay, so again, a couple stitches forward, a couple stitches back, and then just using markings on my foot where I like my. Now, when you stitch, top stitching, whatnot, I don't actually watch where my needle is. I look on my foot where I want to see it. There's a little see-through piece, and I like to see, for this particular stitch, for top stitching, just there's a little line you can't see there. That's the only thing I'm looking at the whole time. If that's lined up, I know that the needle is exactly where it should be. When I stop, the needle's down. Sometimes it still takes a stitch or two. I don't move my hands. It's kind of like taking a picture. You wait until you know it's taken before you move the camera. Notice I'm not pulling really tight, just keeping everything nicely snug. At the end, a couple stitches back, forth. I cut my thread, needles up, lift your foot. And we're gonna go back to the cutting table. Here's my top stitching, just enough to keep it down. A little bit longer stitch I prefer for top stitching. Now we're going to do our French seam along the side and the bottom. Now regular items that you're sewing, you would normally turn it right side together so your prints are facing each other. You'd pin it and then you'd sew it so that when you turn it, you don't see that seam. French seams, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to start placing it the way you would visually see it when it's finished. So the wrong sides are together. And you're going to pin again, lining up. I always start with the cuff. So that at the edge of the cuff and the trim, because there's a way of wiggling these if they're not fully lined up. Okay, so just pin it all the way down. And then we're going to go back and sew a 1/4 inch seam. And we'll do that now. So before we start sewing down the seam, we have to adjust our stitch length back down to, I use a 3 for the regular sewing. I go in about 1/4 to 1/2 inch. Put my presser foot down. I'm using 1/4 inch seam, which is on the edge of my inner foot. Put the needle down, and then I only take one step forward and then I back up just a few to the edge. Sometimes if you start right on the edge, it gets all knotted underneath and you kind of have to start over. And then from there I just go slow until I'm past that point. And again, I'm not looking at the needle, I simply look at the place on the foot I want to see my fabric pass by. Now, it's a little thicker here. If your machine struggles, just go slow. Sometimes you can hand wind it if it's a little bit too much. Now you can see where I cut my selvage. There's a little white and then pink. That's going to be hidden. And I didn't want my pillowcase too narrow, so that's why I only cut off about 1/2 inch. Not the whole 3/4. My fingers here, I'm just pulling slightly to meet where it needs to be for my seam allowance, because sometimes the fabric wants to pull like this, and then I'm going to run right off. So if you notice, I'm not really pulling too much on the back. This seam you're not going to see, but you still want it straight. I'm always pulling a little bit to the side. Now my fabric lined up perfect the way I cut it. Now you'll see by the time I'm at the end, the top moved ever so slightly, just a little bit. You got to watch for that. I sew a lot without my clips and my pins. Something like the cottons and flannelets, they don't shift around a lot. But it comes in handy to know if your machine foot is pushing that top fabric and stretching different layers wrong. Back up a couple stitches. Now, I usually don't cut my thread or lift my foot. I just make sure, take one more, that when I turn it, again, I left my needle in. I'm going to go along the bottom now. I didn't actually pin this one. 1/4 inch seam. Make sure it's aligned. It seems very particular to keep it absolutely perfect, but if you are out just a little bit right from the beginning, your whole project could be really wonky. So to keep it as perfect as possible just gives a nice finished result, because the first incorrect seam allowance makes the second one even worse and the third one just atrocious. Then you're ripping everything out and getting frustrated. Back up. Needle up, foot up, and cut your thread. So now, if you made a larger seam, you can trim it down. Even though mine's 1/4 inch, I was thinking I wasn't going to trim it. I might trim it down just a little bit more down to this pink. I'm just going to use my scissors, because what we're going to do next is turn it inside out, and we're going to sew the seam inside. Also the corners. You just don't cut the thread, but if you cut your corners, you'll make a nicer square on the end. What I do is I just make sure it's the less fabric in the corner, the nicer it's going to be. I backstitch there. I'm just going to cut that off. If you find you didn't, oops, this is where your fray check comes in handy. Or you can just sew another little seam, but sometimes, if I'm not sure, just put a little dab on there, let it dry, and then go on. So what we're going to do, right now I'm at my ironing board. I've clipped the corners and I had trimmed down my seam just a little bit. And what I want to do now is just iron this seam down. See how I'm making it flat? That will help when we sew on this side to make a nice flat seam. We lined up, not too bad there. Now, I'm going to do something really picky. I'm going to look inside, not the outside. Even though I could just pin it and sew through, I actually want this lined up a little bit better than I just saw. So I want to see if when I go in about 1/4 inch, I'm going to wiggle that so that it's lined up. And pin it, or clip it, as best as I can, so it doesn't move. It's really the only major part you're going to see. Poke out your corners. You can use anything from a pencil, a chopstick. I had this from card making, or I have these. They're not actually scissors, they clip. Just be careful you don't poke through your seam, make a hole. What I like is I can grab the corner, kind of wiggle it out. And then I'm gonna Iron it down. Lots of ironing, but it just helps keep your seams nice. And at the top, I accidentally snipped mine short. I usually keep, instead of snipping the corner, I keep it a little longer and I fold it down on itself. I don't know if you can see that. This is pretty tiny. I would fold it down like this and then make my seam so you don't see any raw thread edges. I can still hide them pretty good. It's no big deal if it does show a little bit. But I wiggle it so I don't see those edges. I've gone this far. I don't want to see anything now. Oh goodness. Okay, I'm gonna iron this first. Those clips are wonderful, but they do fly around a lot. Okay, and then I'm going to do the bottom. Again, pull my corner out nice. This is working from the outside. This is what I like. I can just kind of grab it. So we're going to go back to the sewing machine. And because I've cut this down to about 1/8 inch, I could probably sew another 1/4 inch. I'll probably do 3/8 just to make sure I don't see that raw edge from the other seam. This is going to be on the inside of the pillowcase, so it doesn't really matter how thick it is of a seam, as long as you catch the first one inside and hide it. So a little trick I learned, just gonna rethread my bobbin thread so I have a longer tail hanging out here. When I start, this is going to be more likely seen than at the other end when we're done. What we're going to do, again, I don't start right on the edge. I come in and I'm going to do, like I said, about 3/8. Put my needle down. Now I'm going to bring my needle back up. Just, you can turn the handle on the knob on the side. Lift my foot. I'm going to find which thread is the top. I'm going to pull it and bring that bottom thread to the top. I don't want a bunch of knots or funny stitches on the other side, just because it's at the top of the opening. So now I have, pull it down here, I have my thread coming through and I'm holding on to both of them. I'll snug it up and I'll show you what it's going to be like when we're done. Again, I'm making instead of a 1/4 inch seam, I'm going to make it 3/8. I just want to make sure this is the edge or the inside. I want to not catch that. I want to be past it. Needle down, a couple stitches, and go back, and then we're going to, and because it's ironed, it's just going to be really nice. It's not going to bubble and do funny things. Now here, that's where I wanted it lined up. I don't take my finger off it until I absolutely have to. Now we can just go a little faster. Now, I'm not going to end my stitch here, but what I do just to reinforce corner, I actually do a back stitch, and then I just keep my needle down, lift my foot, and turn it. And I just kind of do the same thing just to make that stronger. You can't really see my other hand. I'm guiding and helping the fabric stay in place with that one as well as this one. You don't need to tug and pull. Sometimes it's like driving, where if you make a quick correction, you just make a mistake. Just go slower and gentle maneuvers. Get to the end, back up, forward, needle up, foot up, and you're done. And that is nice and flat. So now we're going to turn it inside out again. Okay, so I turned it inside out. This one corner flattens really nice. Now what you don't want to do is actually trim your corners now, because you're just opening up to raw fabric again. And as you see, this is the corner. Normally you would trim that, but I'm just going to fold it up and hold on to it. I love these little clamps. You can grab a hold of it. And just make that corner a nice little point. And you'll see at the top, this is where we were stitching, where I had the thread brought to the top. There's no knots at the back, it's just your back and forth stitch. And now I can trim that nice. I usually don't treat it with anything, but if you're concerned it'll unravel, again, just put a small dot of fray check on there. It's just like glue, and it'll hold it nice. And then you can iron up your pillowcase if you like. Couple of little loose threads. So that's your finished pillowcase. A little bit smaller trim. If you want, you could top stitch here. You could top stitch anywhere to be more decorative. And then wash it and use it. And you've made yourself your first project with me. Thank you for watching my amateur video and being patient with me as I put it together. I appreciate that, and we'll do many more projects together. If you're watching this on Facebook, post the pillowcases you made in the comments under this video. I would love to see them, or any questions you may have. You can post them, and we'll work through those. And I would love to see you guys learning and progressing in what you're doing. We'll talk to you later. Bye.